New York is ahead of the nation when it comes to certain gun control laws, but when it comes to keeping firearms out of the hands of domestic abusers, well, that's where New York lags behind. Democratic Assemblywoman Amy Pollin, however, she is trying to change that, and she has support from Governor Cuomo. Now, her bill, it would prevent anyone convicted of domestic violence from owning or buying a gun, and right now, that only happens after felonies or even more serious offenses. Now, no matter where you stand on this politically, the numbers show why this is so important. Several studies showed that there is a clear link between abuse and gun violence. 80% of the women shot by their partners involved a man who had physically abused the woman before he killed her. 2/3 of the women shot to death, they were killed by their partner or their ex, and nearly 200,000 abusers have been prevented from buying guns, that thanks to laws already on the books. But there is still a long way to go. I bring in now the Assemblywoman who's kind enough to join us. Thank you. And I got to tell you, until I read this, I thought, in of all places, New York, that this thing, couldn't happen. But there's a gap in the law, right? You can't buy a gun, but however, if you already own a gun, even if there's a restraining order, even if if there is an assault and battery, you can still have that gun in your household.
Yes, you can. It's a loophole in the law. Certainly the judge can aggressively inquire and probably ask that the guns be removed, but because there is that gap in the law, and most misdemeanor domestic violence offenses are in local courts, judges are even unaware that they might have that prerogative, and so they're not asking the questions, and they're not removing those guns. So existing guns are staying in the homes to be used to intimidate, perhaps even lethally, later on.
And if I'm right, what you're trying to do is clear up some of the gray areas that attach, and you touched on some of it, where it's discretionary on the part of the judge, and you want to make it mandatory. And moreover, not certain kind of guns can stay there and certain ones can't. Maybe a handgun's banned, but there could be a rifle or a shotgun. Even long guns would be banned as well.
You know, the federal law is very clear. You cannot possess a gun if you've been convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violence offense. It's very clear. The problem is that it's state laws that are abided by police officers, our state judges.
Right.
So no one is looking at the federal law and saying, aha, we have to make sure that we're in compliance with the federal law. We have to codify the federal law into state law so that it's being used across the board in New York State, and domestic violence abusers will not be able to keep their guns under the circumstance that they've been convicted.
And if people at home think this is some theoretical exercise where it's a solution maybe in search of a problem, as I read this, of the last 10 mass shootings we've had in this country, including Las Vegas and in Texas and other places, they were done by guys who had committed domestic assault before. These were people that were known to be troubled or bad guys, frankly, that shouldn't have been around guns in the first place. And I know in New York, in 2016, firearms were used in 25 domestic homicides. Again, not just in the state of New York. It's already a problem out there right now. We're not trying to get ahead of it. We're trying to address an existing issue.
You probably can't point to any mass shooting, as you point out, that doesn't have some basis in domestic violence. So there's always that link, and that we have to be very careful to be looking at it because we know what's coming.
One of the things that I was a little surprised is the NRA almost, as I read it, they're on board. Maybe they have some caveats, but there's almost nobody that thinks this is a bad idea, what you're trying to do, correct?
Absolutely. We've passed it 3 times in the Assembly. We've had very little opposition, but there was a concern that the gun groups would not think that this was a good idea. So there was that concern in the Senate. We had a hard time even getting a sponsor. And then last year, Diane Savino picked up the bill. I was very happy. Yep. But she was unable to get it passed because there was still concern among many of the Republican colleagues.
What's the worry? Slippery slope here or something? Or what are they?
I think that just, we did the SAFE Act. It's enough. Right. No more in New York. We've done a lot of gun control, and there's no question we're ahead of the curve in many instances, but as you pointed out originally, not in this situation, and we must get there. Now,
mentioned off the top, the governor's in support of this. There is some bipartisan support as well. Are we at a window in time? And I should mention, you've been very courageous. You've spoken out. I mean, we see the Me Too movement right now. Sexual assault is finally getting the attention, and harassment, even for that matter, that's been long overdue in this conversation. And now there's the linkage to saying it's not just that violence and domestic violence. There's certainly the link, as we just discussed. Are we in a window in time here where we're finally addressing this? I know the Times did a terrific long-form series on domestic violence and guns, et cetera, as was attached to it. Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful. I do think we're at a unique window in time, and we can just move ahead. You know, I don't think it's going to, and all laws aren't going to solve the problem.
Right.
You know, we still are going to have a problem. We have to change people's attitudes and change the way we treat each other. But we are at a window for a lot of legislative fixes that we've been hoping for a long time. So I'm very hopeful.
So we finally, before I let you go, the governor has said and recognized your proposal. He's behind it. You finally think we got the votes for this?
I do. I think this is the year.
All right, fingers crossed. Someone, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. Coming up next, everyone, how the Republican tax plan that just became law could be even worse for folks living in our area than originally thought. We'll break down the math straight ahead.